Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്.
लफ्ज़ च सारी कदल तारान
वहीनतुन
आखर हमार मेल सन आखर हमार जोड़
Hoktai homoinar hitu.
Kokthai rock yakraise.
Thuhi inkung kaila siam tu ani.
Ajrahana apati kisale.
Grauthaining yaukrai.
Shabda setu hun.
शब्दां दी सान।
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, festival producer Sanjoy Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you back for our online series Words Are Bridges. Through this series, we aim to highlight the wealth of literature in languages from India and around the world. Our session today is High Winds, Tilottoma Misra and Udayon Misra in conversation with Urvashi Butalia. Set in the picturesque town of Shillong, the novel High Wind by Tilottoma Misra is a sensitive portrayal of the separation of Meghalaya and Assam on ethnic and linguistic grounds. Woven around the life of a Sanskrit scholar and his wife and their journey from the banks of the Brahmaputra to the rolling hills, the fragility of inter-community relationships stands exposed. The Khasi, the Assamese, and the Bengali have a shared heritage in Shillong, but are also deeply divided by certain factors in their history. The novel, which charts a quest for a humane world, was awarded the Lummer Dai Award, instituted by the Arunachal Pradesh Literary Society and the Assam Sahitya Sabha in 2017. Tilottoma Misra had her early education in Shillong, where she obtained a BA with honours in English from Calcutta University, an MA in English from Delhi University, and a PhD from Guwahati University. She taught English literature at the Indraprasth College, Delhi, and subsequently joined the Department of English, Dibrugad University, Assam, from where she retired as a professor in 2007. Udayon Misra is former professor of English literature, an author and social analyst. His publications include The Raj in Fiction, The Periphery Strikes Back, The Transformation of Assamese Identity, India's Northeast Identity Movement, State and Civil Society, and Burden of History. He has been a National Fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and the Indian Council of Social Science Research. Urvashi Butalia is a feminist writer and publisher. She co-founded Kali for Women, India's first feminist publishing house, and when Kali closed down in 2003, she set up Zuban, a feminist publishing house of which she is now director. She has a long involvement in the women's movement in India and writes and publishes widely on issues related to women and gender. Her best-known published work is the award-winning History of Partition, titled The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India. She is currently completing a new non-fiction work on the life of a trans woman. Before we move on to our session, we request you all to follow us on our handles JLF Lit Fest on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get notified on all our upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present High Winds, Tilottoma Misra and Udayon Misra in conversation with Urvashi Butalia.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm going to be talking today to two writers and translators from Assam, Tilottoma Misra and Udayon Misra, who are a very unusual couple, writers and translators, because they both write independently. And Udayon has translated two of Tilottoma's fiction books, an early title called Swarnalata, which is set in the 19th century and which is the story of three women. And now the book that we'll be talking about today, High Wind, which is set in the 20th century, in the 70s, and which traces the history of the undivided Assam and how it splits and how Shillong becomes the capital of the new state, Meghalaya. And it looks at the histories of peoples, identities, nationalisms, and a whole lot more through the story of one family. Udayon, who has translated the book, is himself a really well-known academic in the field of literature, having taught at Dibrugarh University and various other places, and is the author of several books on the Northeast, in which he questions the notion of the Northeast and what it means to put so many diverse states together, in which he also looks at the impact of partition on the Northeast, a subject that hasn't been much studied. And in the middle of all this, Udayon has also worked on these two books and translated them. Tilottoma herself is also a translator. So she has worked on translating writings on Sita, and we'll come to talk about those a little bit later in the session. So let me turn to both of you and welcome you again and ask you if you could talk a little bit, Tilottoma, about your writing in Assamese and the translations that have happened of your work in English by Udayon. Your book, High Wind, Swarna Lata, won several awards. High Wind has also won awards in Assamese. If you could both talk about what it means to be living as you do in two languages, in Assamese and English. You inhabit those worlds, you move from one to the other, you translate from one to the other. So if you could talk a little bit about that in general and in the context of this particular book. Tilottoma, would you like to go first?
Actually, living in the same space, let me begin with that, because there comes all the difficulty. For example, Udayon and me, maybe living in the same geographical space, domestic space, professionally, politically. So a lot of things we tend to share and think similarly maybe, but there is also a lot of difference. For example, as a writer, I always felt that there's a distinct personality of the writer, which cannot always be merged with that of the academic. I have been a teacher and an academic all my life, but I have found it very difficult to keep the two personalities, me as a writer. I am not a great writer. I have written very few novels, only 3. But even then, as an academic person, when I address a particular kind of audience, usually I use English as the language in which I am most familiar with, and I had been educated through English medium throughout my life. Assamese I have never studied at any level as a language, though it is my mother tongue. But when I started writing my novels, somehow I slipped into Assamese, maybe in order to keep a distance from my other personality, the academic person, which I wanted to keep away from interfering with my role as a writer. So when I started writing in Assamese, actually, in the beginning, it was an experiment. I wanted to see how far I can handle my own mother tongue, in which I was never trained. As a scholar, I never passed any examination. Even then, I was very familiar with that language, and yet my language had to be different from the scholarly Assamese, of which I am very afraid. I am not one of the persons who handles scholarly Assamese, and I'm deficient in that. But I have used my mother tongue as freely as possible, at the same time showing various shades of it, as it is spoken by different communities within Assam. So that's how I tried to keep a difference between, though sharing the same space, I have tried to keep a distinction between the two roles.
So when you think of your fiction, when you're writing your fiction, and when you think of it, you think in Assamese, or in your head you're translating, or is it both?
I don't translate in my head, so that's a problem. I think in Assamese, but yes, at certain moments, like when I bring in difficult concepts, I think through English naturally. But then comes the difficulty of translating it simultaneously. And maybe it goes on in my head. I never consult a dictionary to do that. And sometimes I just do free translation of my thoughts as they come.
And you said that you don't want to write in the classical Assamese. You don't want to go there. You want to write in a much more accessible language. In a literary atmosphere where the classical and Assam isn't any different from other places in this, where the classical is given so much weightage, and where any deviation from it is seen as somehow something a little bit less inferior. How do you feel that places you in the canon in Assam?
Actually, I was, as I told you in the beginning, I was very, very reluctant even to publish my first novel in Assamese, Swarnalata. It just, I never gave it to any publisher thinking that my language is defective. I was not sure about it. And someone told me, my first publisher told me that no one reads a novel these days in your mother tongue, except women from some housewives from suburban places. So I was very discouraged. Anyway, that's why I was very diffident about my language. But when it was finally published, I found that people loved my novel exactly because it is written in a different kind of language. And of course, in translation, it doesn't come true. I've tried to produce the varieties of the language, through different characters, how they handle the language. And I've done a lot of hard work doing that, I think, picking up, trying to read about the different accents, the way you listen to a language, which I have tried to reproduce through my writings. I don't know, people seem to have liked that kind of a approach.
Also, housewives from suburban places are actually amazing readers.
Yes.
And sometimes they even restore, presidents to their glory or whatever, as has happened to Trump in America. So we should not, should look at that.
I know, exactly. I felt very encouraged. The kind of mails I got in those days, of course, it was all snail mail. I still have preserved those letters, bundles of them, almost fan mail from women from different parts of the state.
Let's turn to Udayan. Udayan, for you, so just as Tilottoma has described that she inhabits these two different identities as teacher, academic, and then fiction writer, and tries to keep them apart, your primary identity is that of teacher, academic, that you're translating Tilottoma's work, who is so close to you, and she spoke about the difficulty of being in the same space, domestic and geographical. For you, how does it work? Is that a difficulty, challenge, opportunity? So, and what do you do with your academic personality? Do you leave it behind to enter the space of fiction?
Actually, first of all, I would like to say that I have basically been a teacher of English literature. I've loved teaching English literature. But at one point of my life, because of, I think, certain social concerns, political concerns which we share together, I felt that certain things were not very relevant to the type of teaching texts which I do. But I love teaching literature, that's true. It's given an edge to my writings. But I also started writing about other social issues. And this is where I got involved in so many social movements as well. And that took me to what people call me as a social analyst or whatever it is. So my writings, actually, initial writings, I had worked on this 19th century British writing on India. My book has also been published.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was well received also here and abroad. But I gradually moved to writing on issues that were of immediate concern to all of us, because Assam in the Northeast was moving to a very difficult times in those days. And there were a lot of assertions of identity at different levels, which had very strong historical reasons. But also at the same time, there was a lot of fragmentation of social space now, and a lot of rise of community passions, which I felt, to be a threat to so many things. It's also a threat to creative writing in many ways. So that is how I got involved. Now, coming to the two different worlds, I think the world of the creative writer is a totally different private world from the world which I have lived in. It's been a very different world. But I decided to translate these two novels, the first novel, because I found a lot of things which I thought others should also share. A lot of, concerns about family life, community passions, about changes, about superstitions, everything all come. So I thought that this is something that needs to be shared. And that's the reason I translated Swarnalatha. I found it to be a competent novel, not otherwise. The second one, of course, again, I discovered a lot of things which are so relevant to our times, especially as someone belonging to this region. So I found a lot of echoes in the novel, and especially the type of very subtle, presentation of issues related to majoritarian feelings of a community, because people don't like to speak about these, about nationalism, its limits, about the whole idea of patriotism, which constricts you so much in so many ways, and how through one particular character who begins in a very traditional way, I'm talking of Haimavati, the central character, how very silently, without being overtly feminist in any way, she ultimately moves through all these different areas and finally ends up in a position which you can call to be broadly humanistic. So this is what attracted me, and that is why I translated the novel, but I am no translator as such. I am not at all acquainted with the whole theory of translation, as people write tomes on it. I don't know how people do, but I don't know how you can get into it. I translated it because I like the novel, and I would like to translate other novels also, if I get the time, by other writers. But apart from that, I think for a translator, it is the sense of involvement that is more important. And as far as the power of language or the nuances, a lot of nuances naturally get lost. But in this case, in High Wind, I think both of us are very fortunate in having such a capable editor in you. And Urvashi, you have given it also a different type of a flavor, making it much more readable. So I'm very thankful, and Tilottoma also, to you for doing it.
Thank you. That's really nice of you. But let me go back to, so there's a curiosity that readers often have about the relationship between translators and writers, and especially, as you say, when you're located within the same domestic space. So how did it work when you were doing it? Did you have lots of conversations about it? Did you talk across the dinner table and say, what did you mean by this passage? Or did you not communicate at all? Or was it, what was the process?
I don't think there was a lot of communication, especially, only a few points sometimes I have to ask her about certain words. But I did it without thinking of the writer. I never thought, that I would get help from the writer in translating it. But basically, I think it was, you might say, in a cliche term, a labor of love for me, which turned out to be the translator. And as Tilottoma said, just as she didn't have any formal training in Assamese, at least she studied, I think, up to class 2 or 3 in Assamese. I never studied Assamese at any level, in school or at any level at all. Whatever I learned of Assamese is at home, and primarily through my efforts, through reading of newspapers. And I had to read all the local newspapers initially thoroughly, because I also used to write on social issues. So that is what took me. And naturally, I think I am a bit competent in the language now, because I also edited a Assamese journal for many years, a left-wing journal. So that way, I think the mother tongue comes in. But one point that Tilottoma made, which I would like to reiterate here, is that the spoken language, if it is spoken correctly at home, I think is a great advantage to both the translator and to the writer. If it is spoken correctly, more or less correctly at home. And that, I think that advantage both of us had in our homes.
Okay, Tilottoma, so would you now like to tell us a little bit of what High Wind is about, where it locates itself? I gave that one-line summary, but that's not in any way adequate. So just in brief, how would you as writer describe what your novel is about?
Well, I don't know, when I started writing that novel, I tried to sort of critique or try to introspect, the various issues, problems encountered by 3 generations of my own family settled in Shillong, because in those days Shillong was the colonial capital of Assam for 100 years, from 1873, I think, to 1972. So lots of Assamese families like my own, my father, my grandfather, they had all settled in Shillong, and they had created, in a way, small islands of their own, each community. As I grew up, I always felt that each of us, whether you are Bengali, Assamese, Khasi, Anglo-Indian, or there are many various communities there, they all grew up in their own communities. And at some time in our life, we started rejecting, many of the prejudices, many of the views, beliefs of our own communities, and we started critiquing them when we mixed with other communities and found that the world is very different from what we grew up in. So in that way, Shillong was a great learning place. It is a place which had a magic of its own. It transformed our personalities. In a way, I feel my book is like a kind of a history of Shillong in a way, because it shows the transformation of the place through the transformation of the different communities, how the communities started overcoming barriers and boundaries, and how there was intermixing in various ways, culturally and otherwise, through intermarriage also, and how the new generation that is there in Shillong now has inherited so many of these ideas that it has bonded them in a different way. I have tried to show that in the last chapter of my book. It begins with the first chapter, ends with that at the end, that it's a kind of bonding which I have seen it, experienced it in my own life, and I feel very deeply about it. Like today when I go back to Shillong, none of the people I knew in my childhood days are there anymore. Everyone has moved on, they have migrated to other places after the shifting of the capital from Shillong to Guwahati. All the Assamese people, most of them have gone off to other places. So even then, when I go back, I feel, that magic of Shillong. It is still there in all its trees, in the nature, and in the new generation, which has inherited the music, the culture, the dances. There was so much of interchange of ideas, that I feel totally indebted to my birthplace, though it is now a very different place.
In fact, you both talked about this, and Udayan referred to it also a few minutes back, about how the rise of identity politics in the region in some ways has led to a positive articulation of certain kinds of marginalized identities, but has also led to a kind of almost ethno-nationalism, right-wing intolerance, which, as Udayan said a minute ago, also hampers the creative process. So that must be quite a disturbing thing to watch happening in your own neighborhood. Would either of you like to comment on that?
Or me or Udayan?
Either you choose, because you both talked about it. So,
Urvashi, actually, I don't want to go into the historical reasons for the coming up of identity politics. There was a lot of Assamese hegemony after 47, and there was a lot of insensitivity on the part of the new rulers, if I use the word rulers, or the new set of people who are running the government. Now, all these contributed naturally to the unhappiness of the marginalized classes or communities or sub-nationalities, small nationalities. I prefer to call them the small nationalities. Now, assertion of the small nationalities is a historical process in the Northeast. And I think it has brought us there a lot of positive elements, as you have suggested. But ultimately, when you come down to the brass tacks, the process of the assertion, in most cases, the process of the assertion releases a lot of community passions. And it is in the release of these community passions which invade our universities, our institutions, where the freedom of speech, or the more important, the freedom of thought, the right to think, which is so very cardinal to creative writing, that gets affected. And apart from that, you move away from just, I sometimes feel that high wind is also a sort of a wish fulfillment. That this was so nice. It may have had its hindrances, but it's nice to believe that everyone, interacted with everyone else. There were no barriers. Different types of barriers were there, but not the type of barriers which you see now. So with the rise of ethnic nationalism in the entire region, I'm not talking of any particular nationality, I think the first casualty is inclusive social space. You don't have, you don't believe in that inclusive social. The me and you become very important. The outsider and the insider becomes very important. And that, I think, has been a major casualty in the Northeast. Now, when I reflect back, because most of my writings are also related to identity politics, how it has happened. But when I look back now and I feel, that the world is constricted in many ways. On other sides, it has opened up in other ways, but I think we have also lost a lot. And how to make up for the loss, and how to, give that freedom of thought and expression, even to people who are more or less, I don't want to use second-class citizens, but citizens who have been, deprived of many of their rights as per the Constitution. So now when I look back in this, growing old now, so I can look back and think, I think, yes, a lot has been lost. That's why. And the whole idea of fragmentation and the denial of citizens' rights to thousands of people in what we call ethnic homelands. This has come. And this is a reality which neither the government nor the majority communities are prepared to tackle. They always, try to shy it off. Yeah. So that is the sad part of the story, I feel.
That is the sad part, you're right. Yeah. Tilottoma, would you like to add? Yeah.
Yeah, you had also mentioned that about the inner line, concept of the inner line. Now the inner line and the outer line, they now become the key issue in whole of Northeast. Everyone is asking for inner line. But I feel, it is a line through your heart, sort of inner lines. In a way, they protect communities. They're meant to protect. But at the same time, they exclude others so drastically that it's become a very, very sensitive issue.
Tilottoma, can I request you, I have lots of other questions, but before we move on, can I request you to read a bit from your book, a passage in Assamese, and if Udayan might read the English of that?
Okay.
Be nice for listeners to get a sense of the language.
I'll just read, I think, because I have it in hand, the last part from my Kame Khar Ghor, which is now the English translation is high wind. Kame Khar Ghor, the name itself, it's actually it's a pun, you know, Kamekha. Sometimes people may confuse it with Kamakhya, you know, and there are scholars who have said that Kamakhya is actually related to an old Khasi goddess, maybe Kamekha, but it also means the grandmother's house, Kamekhar Ghor. So I'll end with I'll read a passage from the last part of the book, which I think brings in many of the issues. Hitor Khukan Dinburer Pasot Ako Bochantor Agomon, High Windor Homukor Pulonikonot, Ezelia Duzupat, Hari Hari, Hakuborania Pul Puliutise, Jarkali Borof Puri Hukaijua Ghahonikon, Punor Heuzia Khainre Dhaki Dhorise, আৰু তাৰ মাজে মাজে ফুলিছে হাজাৰ হাজাৰ হালধীয়া ডেণ্ডেলিয়ন শুনা মনে হালধীয়া ফুলবোৰ ছিঙি ছিঙি অকণমানি পাৰুৰ হাতত গুজি দিছে নেন্সিহঁতে তাইক কেতিয়াবা দিনটোৰ বাবে হাই উইণ্ডত থৈ যায় পাৰুৱে উৰি ফুৰা ডেণ্ডেলিয়নৰ কোমল তুলাবোৰ ধৰিবলৈ ঘাঁহনিৰ ওপৰত দেউদি ফুৰিছে তাইক দেখি শুনা মনৰ মনত পৰে লাবানৰ ব্ৰহ্মপল্লীত অতিবাহিত হোৱা সিহঁতৰ শৈশৱৰ দিনবোৰলৈ সেই দিনবোৰ আৰু সেই মানুহবোৰ এতিয়া আৰু দেখিবলৈ পোৱা নাযায় বেছিভাগ পুৰণি ঘৰতে এতিয়া নতুন বাসিন্দা পুৰণি মানুহ কাৰোবাক লগ পালে কাৰ ঘৰটো কোনে কিনিলে সেই লৈ বহু আলোচনা চলে লগে লগে শুনামনৰ মনটো এক বিষাদৰ ভাৱে আসন্ন কৰি তোলে শুনামনৰ মনৰ অৱস্থা অৱশ্যে এতিয়া হৰ্ষ বিষাদৰে ভৰপুৰ এপ্ৰিল মাহত তাই বিয়া হ'ব লাগে লগৰে বেংকৰ সহকৰ্মী পংকজ গুপ্তৰ সৈতে আৰু বিয়াৰ পাছত তাই শিলং এৰি যাবগৈ ডিব্ৰুগড়লৈ পংকজৰ ইতিমধ্যে ট্ৰান্সফাৰ হৈ গৈছে তাইও ডিব্ৰুগড়লৈ বদলিৰ বাবে আবেদন কৰিছে ভয়ামৰ এই প্ৰথমবাৰৰ বাবে তাই থকাকে যাব শিলং এৰি যোৱাৰ কথা ভাবিলে তাইৰ মনটো বিষাদৰে ভৰি পৰে তথাপি সেই ভাৱটোৱে তাইৰ সপোনবোৰ বিনষ্ট কৰিব পৰা নাই ফেব্ৰুৱাৰী মাহৰ হিম শীতল বতাহজাকে হাই উইণ্ডৰ চৌহদৰ সৰল গছবোৰৰ মাজেৰে এক ৰহস্যময় আৰণ্য সংগীতৰ লহৰ তুলি যায় হৈম পঞ্চতীৰ্থৰ শুৱনি কোঠাটোৰ খিৰিকীৰ ফ্ৰেমৰ মাজেৰে সদায় দেখা পোৱা হাউলি থকা অকলশৰীয়া সৰল গছজোপাৰ ডাল পাতবোৰ বতাহত পুনৰ আন্দোলিত হৈ উঠিছে ঘৰতে গছজোপালে চাই ভাবে মানুহৰ জীৱনটো ঠিক এনেকুৱাই বাৰে বাৰে ধুমুহাই কোবাই গলেও নিজস্ব সঞ্জীৱনী শক্তিৰে মানুহে পুনৰ পূৰ্ণ হৈ থিয় দিব পাৰে I think that will be enough. Just one page.
Yeah, it's a really nice feel of the sound. Udayan.
I'll read bits here and then I'll go off to the last part. Spring had finally arrived after the long dry winter months. The 2 azalea bushes in the garden of Highwind were now in full bloom with dazzling deep pink flowers. The grass on the lawn, which had dried up because of the winter frost, was now once again green with hundreds of dandelions in bloom. Sonamon was plucking the small yellow flowers and placing them in the little hands of she was called at home. I move on to another part. February's strong winds rushed through the tall pine trees of Highwind, creating a mysterious music of their own. The branches of the tall, solitary, and slightly bent pine tree, which was visible from the window of Panchatirtha's bedroom, were once again swaying violently in the strong wind. Sorat often looked at the tree and found similarities with it when it came to facing the challenges of his life. Like so many others, the tree too had withstood all the storms of life and continued to stand firm and erect. It was after several days that Sorat once again opened the lid of the old piano. As he ran his fingers over the keyboard, he tried to listen to the music of nature outside. The cicadas from the pine trees were heralding the event of evening with their continuous 5-fold tunes, creating a strange resonance. And from deep within the woods came the mysterious 2-fold call of the hill cuckoo, which always reminded Sorat of Wordsworth. He suddenly started playing from memory, a cheerful piece from Vivaldi's Four Seasons. At first, in a low key, somewhat uncertainly. Then he opened his music book and started playing to his heart's content. Every wall of High Wind resounded with Vivaldi's composition, the entire house coming back to life at the touch of the vibrant notes. Would that do?
Thank you. That's beautiful. And actually, it's perfect because it leads me to a question I wanted to ask you both, which is about music. Because this passage that you read is so musical and it ends with the actual music of playing. But you've spoken about how about music as a kind of uniting factor, about music reaching out much beyond the communities. And I think you spoke about Bhupen Hazarika's music and how it was owned by so many different people. So can you talk a little bit about this sense of art and music being able to reach across community boundaries and what that means? Yes, please.
I'll begin and Tilottoma will take up.
Yes. Yeah.
I think, again, you know, when you talk of the Northeast, you talk also of violence, a lot of community strife. And our experience has been, you know, right from the 50s onwards when we were much younger, that during such moments, music plays a very binding force. I'll start with the Indian People's Theatres Association, the IPTA. Whenever trouble started, especially up to the 1960s, when we had the language riots and so on, you know, the fight over the Assamese language to be made the official language, which I feel was the beginning of so many other problems. But anyway, when there were quite violent riots in the plains of Assam, I think it was Bhupen Hazarika and his IPTA group led by Hemango Biswas and others. They toured the entire Brahmaputra valley, singing. And it is their singing, their songs. Some of the best Bhupen Hazarika songs were written at that time. And I think it brought a lot of succor to people. I don't know how far it unites, but it at least, you know, calms down a lot of passions. So similarly, in other periods also we have seen music being very important as a binding force. And even in Meghalaya now, I think music brings the people of Meghalaya and Assam very closer. So they have rock festivals, but the Shillong Symphony, which is quite famous throughout the world, Shillong Choir, which is quite famous throughout the world, they have sung the Assamese national anthem in a superb manner. So it's a bridge, as you said in our program. It's a very important bridge that continues to exist between different areas of the northeastern region, and I hope it'll be further strengthened in the years to come. That's what I feel.
Thank you. Tilottoma?
Yes, you're right about Shillong. Shillong is the place we always associate with music. Right from childhood, we have seen that in every house, if you go out in the evening, some strain of music will be heard, whether it is piano, Western music, or Indian classical. You know, Bengali localities, if you go through that, you'll be hearing classical music or Rabindra Sangeet. So we grew up, literally, it's a small town, but there were varieties of musical performance in Shillong. People like Hemango Biswas, Udayon has talked about, Bhupen Hazarika, they sort of began their career in a way in Shillong. The audience was always the huge audience. You never lacked an audience. And today, of course, you have Majao and all these Shillong Choir and all the pop groups. They never lack an audience because it is a place for music, we always felt. And it cannot help but come into the pages of the book because it is so much a part of life in Shillong. The varieties of music and just a part of the school syllabus also. Everywhere music was taught and people sang and danced. So I think I brought in a bit of that into the novel. as a part of the.
Yeah, that's lovely. I didn't realize it was part of the syllabus as well, singing, dancing. You're right, because when you think back, you see it all the time. Okay, a last word, Tilottoma, very quickly. We have just a couple of minutes left. Can you tell us a bit about your work on Sita?
Okay, it's again a translation, but it's a very different kind of translation from what I have done till now. And I'm full of trepidation about it because I've taken up a work which has not been done by people till now, at least in our part of the country. It's a text, a 14th century vernacular Ramayana, rendered into Assamese by a Assamese poet Madhav Kandoli. And also there's a part of it, the Uttarakanda is by Srimanta Shankardev. So I found that the representation of Sita in this vernacular version is very different from that in the Valmiki version or the other vernacular versions of the epic. That's why I thought it is necessary to translate parts of the text. I mean, I'm not capable of doing the whole of it. I have made selections where Sita's voice comes through. So I have called it Sita's voice in the Assamese Ramayana. And she speaks in a language and in a tone very different, I feel, from the Valmiki Sita. And that's why I have tried to highlight that particular representation of Sita in the Assamese version of the epic. And in my introduction, I have tried to probe into this whole matter. Why is it? What socio-cultural compulsions may have been there? Because it was patronized by a local tribal king, Varahi Kachari king, who commissioned this Brahmin poet to translate the book into Assamese, though he himself probably could never read and write in that language. But the whole thing was orally represented. Madhav Kandoli translated it and he read it out to the king. And in the text itself, he has often brought in it that the king is listening while I'm relating this. So what was the compulsion of having that epic translated into a remote area, you can say, of the Brahmaputra Valley? And why were the characters, both Rama, Sita, and others, represented in a particular manner, which was closer to the local people, the language of the local people, their expressions, their idioms, which have been very nicely sort of portrayed through the language of the characters. So I have tried to, as far as possible, I have tried to translate and represent in my own way Sita's voice in the Assamese Ramayana through my English translation. But I don't know how far I have been successful. I'm waiting for the response from readers.
I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Thank you both very, very much for speaking to us. It's been lovely talking to you. I've learned a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Urvashi. Bye.
Bye.
As Tilottoma said, music does bring us together and bridges differences. Thank you, Tilottoma, Udayan, and Urvashi for that wonderful session. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. If you've enjoyed the session, please do share with your friends, family, and on your social media pages. We will be back next week with a new session on Jaipur Literature Festival's Words Are Bridges. Have a lovely evening.